on such short notice. I appreciate the hard work on this, and I felt it was important to get this meeting in place and kind of have a discussion around the room. But before we get into the depths of this meeting, I'd like to call the MAG Executive Committee meeting to order. For those around the table, please turn on your microphone when speaking so that those on the phone can hear you. For those participating via Zoom, please remember to unmute your device before speaking and mute when you are not speaking to create a positive experience for all attendees. Phone participants should use 6 to mute, unmute, and 9 to raise their hand. Is there anybody, let's do a call to the order. Was there anybody, I don't think we do, but anybody who filled out a card or wanted to speak?
No, we have nobody who's submitted requests.
Just for the record, 3 opportunities are provided for public comment, including call of the audience, consent agenda, and actions to be heard. MAG also provides the opportunity for members of the public to submit written comments via the MAG website prior to the meeting, as long as the comments are received at least 1 hour prior to the posted start time for the meeting. If there is anybody who would like to comment at today's meeting, please fill out a white request to speak card located on the information counter. Please be sure to indicate the item for which you want to speak and give it to a designated staff member. Remember, if you park in the garage, validate your ticket. Parking validators are available on the information table in the hallway. For those who purchase a transit ticket to come to the meeting, please see staff for a ticket. And hearing assisted devices are available from MAG staff. Can we go ahead and do a roll call and just establish the quorum?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the Executive Committee, I will go down the list of members alphabetically. Please indicate if you are present. Mayor Gallego?
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Giles?
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Hartke? Mayor Hermosillo?
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Osborne?
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Peterson?
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Weiss?
Here.
Thank you. Is there anyone that I missed? Mr. Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you. And just to reconfirm, there is no one who would like to speak from the audience on this issue or address the committee, correct?
Correct.
All right. Item number 4 is an update on HB 2685. Hey, Nathan, do you mind taking over for this?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Executive Committee. Today, I'm going to give an overview on legislative activities since we last met as a regional council on June 22. We have a planned approach to discuss the agenda item. I'll go through that as well, and then I'll provide additional remarks. So, Mr. Chairman, since the regional council meeting on June 22nd, we've been focusing during the legislative session our energies on Senate Bill 1356, provided an update at regional council at that time. Also noting that at that time, we were up against a June 25 due date with the county to call a November 22 ballot. Since that time, and immediately after that June 22nd regional council meeting, we quickly moved to our other bill vehicle, House Bill 2685, which was a strike everything. We dropped pursuit of the emergency clause to go for a November 22 ballot. And House Bill 2685 created an option for a March 2023 ballot. In the hours after that, the Senate did pass on a vote of 19-9, House Bill 2685, and then subsequently the House took that up, passed it 37-21. House Bill 2685 was then transmitted to the governor on June 24th. Since that time, outreach to the governor's office did continue, both by member agencies and by the business community. Fast forward to this week, on Wednesday, July 6th, in the early afternoon, MAG consultant and staff heard of a potential for a veto. MAG staff to convene an internal meeting reacting to this news, and we were planning to send an action alert to member agencies requesting their outreach to the governor's office. However, at 3:08 p.m. During that meeting, we received a veto letter through our consultant Policy AZ. I should note that our read on Arizona revised statute is that House Bill 2685 would have become law without the governor's signature at midnight earlier today or 11:59 p.m. yesterday, however you interpret that. Would like to thank our bill sponsors once again, Senator Pace, Representative Carroll. Both were strong bill champions and worked tirelessly with their colleagues to advance our enabling legislation. So thank you to our bill sponsors. Mr. Chairman, our plan for this agenda item, next we would like to have Eric to discuss impacts of the transportation plan and projects impacts by this veto. Policy AZ is on hand to provide additional insight on the veto. We can certainly open this up for discussion and Q&A on relevant issues from the veto. Noting, of course, this item is on for proposed action to develop a response to the veto. Discussion by this executive committee's membership will help inform drafting that response to the veto. And finally, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to conclude these opening remarks by saying MAG is the member agencies. Thank you to our 27 cities and towns, 3 Native nations, and 2 counties. We'd like to thank you for your involvement and activity, not just in the past 6 months of legislative session, but the past 4 and 5 years when we launched this effort. Recall that we were talking about values mapping in fall of 2018. Also during that time, the member agencies worked responsibly through the freeway rebalance in the spring of 2019. Our gratitude extends to the chairs and members of the Regional Council and Transportation Policy Committee, as well as the Management Committee, the Managers Working Group, your transportation planning staff who contributed and shared your transportation goals through 2050, and also your government relations staff who have been essential in making this all work. Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it back to you. We have planned for Eric Anderson to discuss impacts and considerations of the veto. Also noting, of course, again, the conversation by the executive committee will inform the planned response to the veto. Also, just a final note, unanimous adoption of the regional transportation plan has been a significant achievement. You and your staff contributed to the development of a long-range multimodal plan to provide mobility, address our unprecedented growth, and create economic opportunities. As MAG staff, we thank you all for your involvement. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Nathan, thank you for that. I do want to touch on something before Eric takes over, and that is the response from mayors across the valley, whether Republican or Democrat, to the mayor's veto has been strong, it's been forceful, it's been blunt, but there is one voice that is missing from that, and that is Mayor Gail Barney's voice. Tragically, Mayor Barney passed away. He was a powerful voice, not only in the East Valley, but for our organization and for the region. It's hard to imagine that we've lost 2 powerful mayors in the last year. We're saddened by his loss. We pray for his family. Our family is in our thoughts and prayers. I'll be there tonight for the wake, but I just wanted that on the record that we would be a much stronger organization with Mayor Barney with us today. So Eric, if you don't mind taking over after that.
Thank you, Mayor Weiss. Appreciate that. And I would also like to thank you all for your response to the veto letter. I think that the responses were absolute, very well spoken, and I think we're very effective. So obviously, we're deeply disappointed by the veto. The decision contradicts the input we received from residents, stakeholders across Maricopa County as part of our multi-year legislative prescribed plan development process. It's really important, we follow the process as outlined in state statute for us in development of the plan. Tens of thousands of residents and stakeholders have weighed in and provided feedback. Over 400 meetings and presentations to stakeholders. The investment plan received unanimous recommendations from the Transportation Policy Committee, inclusive of the 6 legislative appointed business members on TPC, and unanimous support of the MAG Regional Council. The investment plan was unanimously supported by our elected officials that collectively represent 64% of the state's population. Not only does this veto circumvent voters, the decision puts both future and near-term transportation projects at risk during an unprecedented time for growth and economic prosperity in the region and state. And to be clear, the plan you and this region spent the last 4+ years developing is sound. It reflects our most pressing transportation needs, the difficult compromises you came together to make, and represents the priorities of our constituents and what they told us they wanted to support their quality of life and prosperity in this region. Our challenge now is finding a path forward for which we can deliver for our constituents and the voters in Maricopa County. Recent approvals of the Prop 400 modal programs were completed with the assumption that the tax would be extended. In light of the governor's veto, MAG needs to spend some time in the coming weeks and months evaluating the existing funding programs. Because the risk now exists for disruption or termination in the 40-year dedicated sales taxes has anchored the region's multimodal transportation system, this reevaluation may include how or what projects should be funded to bookend / complete the final years of the Proposition 400 program. There are a number of additional challenges the governor's veto now creates, including how to allocate federal formula funding or the ability to chase new federal discretionary funding, such as in the IIJA, when no required regional match dollars are available. Maricopa County, as a reminder, is the only county in the state that must first seek state legislative authority to ask county voters to continue a dedicated county tax that was first established in 1985. The governor has made it clear with his veto that even with the statutory prescribed process, unique only to Maricopa County, is broken, meaningless, moot, and false. As such, MAG believes it's imperative to immediately begin research to evaluate alternatives to provide this region the autonomy needed to ensure the investments needed to sustain our world-class transportation system can be made. Our transportation network, built by the dedicated sales tax, is responsible for the economic prosperity of our region and the state. What we do now, the region has demonstrated more than $90 billion in needed transportation investments, far exceeding available revenues generated by a 25-year extension of the dedicated half-cent sales tax. Difficult but judicious decision by you to stay at a half cent was in reflection of the political climate and at the direction of the state legislature. Certainly not what we heard from our residents and stakeholders alike who supported a larger investment. For this fastest growing region and state, the consequences of the veto decision cannot be understated or ignored. The state's failure for supporting transportation and needed infrastructure investments are compounding. In referring to the freeway component of the plan, the governor's letter states, and I quote, and it fails to provide a clear framework on how these assets will be maintained as they continue to age. This is not appropriate financial stewardship to preserve the investment from previous generations, close quote. As a reminder, it is the state's responsibility to maintain the state highway system. The state's inaction to remedy the diminishing highway user revenue fund. The last time revenues into HERF were increased was 1991. The result of the lack of action by the state results in maintenance and repair backlog, both for the state highways and local streets. Just in this region, we're projecting a $7 billion deficit for the freeway system in Maricopa County by 2050, and another $7 billion shortfall in cities and towns and counties and native nations in the region that rely on the HERF to build and maintain local roadways. The state has failed in its responsibilities. On a side note, the extension plan for the Prop 400 extension included over $1 billion to rebuild I-17. That is a state responsibility, but that is something that the region decided was very important. Arizona remains one, if not the only state not to have a dedicated revenue source for transit. This places responsibility for rapidly urbanized areas yearning for expanded and better quality transit service squarely at the local and regional level to circulate people within, to, and through the region and state. Without these investments in transit and alternative modes, the region will be challenged to meet federal air quality non-attainment targets. The governor has taken a lot of credit for projects that were, in fact, enabled through the dedicated sales tax. Several months back, the governor celebrated the signing of a bill to allocate $400 million to widen I-10 between Phoenix and Casa Grande. This is actually only a portion of what's needed, with more than $200 million of the region's Prop 400 money allocated to this project, and the federal discretionary money needed to make up the difference. In light of the governor's actions, the I-10 widening is now in jeopardy. And what that means, there may be projects that have more benefit to the region than putting $200 million on widening an interstate in the region. $50 million in funding from Prop 400 was also used to secure a federal grant for the widening of I-17 north of Anthem. That project is under construction or about to be under construction today. Once again, that statewide improvement would not otherwise been possible without the participation of the $50 million of MAG money in the program. Necessary infrastructure improvements to Loop 303 needed to support the new Taiwanese semiconductor manufacturing company facility are being funded solely with the dedicated transportation sales tax. In addition, there are significant improvements on Loop 303 that need to be made as part of the extension, including the system interchange at Loop 303 and I-17. We welcome the continued contributions of the state for transportation investments. The governor touts the $1 billion put into the transportation this year from the general fund surplus. But in the context of state needs of well over $100 billion, it really doesn't even make a dent. Once again, Mr. Chair, that completes my remarks. I appreciate your this opportunity to provide my comments. Thank you.
Eric, thank you for that. I really want to get input from the entire committee, and I will tell you that my opinion is that whatever response comes from this committee, if we decide to go that way, comes from a signed document or a press conference with as many members present as possible. I'm glad I see Mayor Giles there. Mayor, I've kind of highlighted the differences in our personalities. My personality is to shoot first and aim second. I hate that pun, but it best describes how I react. You have a tendency to have a more measured demeanor. I'd like to kind of go around the room and start with you and kind of get what you think our response to this be, and then I would like to go to the vice chair after that, and then go around the room after that.
Thank you, Mayor Weiss. You might be disappointed in my my restraint. I think you certainly would have been yesterday. My staff will tell you that I was using words that they haven't heard me use before. I do have obviously some thoughts on this. So I think it's important. I think the governor has made a gross miscalculation here. And I think if he thinks that the consequences of this are just going to be some pushback from some mayors, we need to make sure he's very disappointed in that assumption. I've heard from our congressional delegation. I've heard from county supervisors. I've heard from people in the business community. And once you start, as Eric did a moment ago, start doing the math, you know, to suggest that, oh, we're concerned about inflation, so we're going to put on ice transportation infrastructure for the next 2 years. That's nonsense, isn't it? I mean, so I think we need to rain down fire on the argument that there's any rationality behind what the governor did yesterday. So the more that we amplify the voices beyond MAG, the better. The consequences to our economy, the consequences to our quality of life are very compelling. And so I think what I've been telling people the last few hours is the next governor's got to fix this. The next legislature's got to fix this. We've got to elevate this and hold elected officials responsible for something that's been done very irresponsibly. Eric, I appreciated in your comments, the underlying root cause of this problem is this unconstitutional treatment that Maricopa County receives relative to the other counties in the state of Arizona. The idea that a legislator or a statewide elected official from a far-flung corner of our state dictates to the people of Maricopa County what they get to submit to the voters is crazy. And again, if that same limitation is not on every other county in the state, to me, as an attorney, I'm offended by that. That's unconstitutional. And I think that we need to immediately mount a legal challenge. And I think that's the best fix to this, is that we have that prohibition set aside. That would empower us to go to our board of supervisors, declare a special election, and try to get back on track as soon as possible.
So I think, Mayor, I appreciate all your comments, and I will tell you that for me, there's nothing off the table. You mentioned possible future governors. The truth is that the action that we take in the next few minutes, the next few hours, and the next few days is not only a rebuttal to the current governor, but a message to future governors that we stand united in what we're trying to accomplish. And Mayor Gallego, you are one of the most blunt and forceful mayors to comment. So I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is such an important tax for our region. I guess I should first start, MAG staff has been working on this, I understand, since 2017. So I want to thank everyone who did all of the research and all of the work to get where we were. I want to thank my colleagues on MAG and the TPC and the legislators who voted for it. This really is the future of our region. It's whether or not our economy can change and modernize, whether or not people can get to work, to medical appointments, to the bus. Our essential workers rely on the system that this tax funds. Our region, as has been said before, is prosperous because we've invested in infrastructure. And this veto is so incredibly short-sighted from my perspective. So many of the governor's top accomplishments on the economic development side, we made commitments to invest in infrastructure in order to enable those investments. We made those commitments together. And every day, every hour, we understand now more projects that have been deeply impacted by this veto. So I would love to see MAG staff do a deep dive so that we can fully understand all of the impacts this veto has had. And if you could come back to us, which projects are most impacted and just do our list of priorities still make sense? I'm very supportive of looking at a constitutional challenge, but I'd like MAG staff to research all of our options to extend the tax. So that includes going back to the legislature, but I would hope it would also include the initiative process and what would need to be in place to look at a more direct democratic process. I think voters have supported this for 37 years because it has made their lives better, and they deserve a chance to continue those type of investments. I also would love to see us push back very hard on the governor around maintenance. The state needs to do their part. We cannot be asked to backfill the state requirement that they have not had the political will to fund. So disappointing. So I think we do need to find a way forward, and we may want to look at multiple different tools because this is so essential. If MAG staff could just help us understand the project commitments, given the potential disruption of termination of the tax, and give us the risks to different projects and their delivery. And I think both the TPC and the MAG Regional Council needs that information to understand if we need to reprioritize programs and adjustments. It's also be helpful for us to be able to articulate what does this mean for us as we compete for economic development and also for federal funds. So, and I would also be interested in just what financing risk this has as we go forward. It seems that there are some who thinks that just waiting 2 years has no impact at all. And it would be good to put some dollars around what does this mean for our region. So again, thank you for all who worked to get it so far. I am so disappointed by the veto.
Kate, I will tell you, and hopefully, and members of the committee, I have a tendency to use first names, and hopefully that's not disrespectful to you, but I think we've built a relationship over the last few years and decades. Kate, I would agree with you, and I think that we hear the public speak about and scream for bipartisanship. We hear the public speak and scream about us working together to make their lives better. And then for purely political reasons, a project that epitomizes that effort, 4 years of work that epitomizes cooperation is thrown out the window for some political agenda. I think if we're going to speak to this, and Mayor Giles and Mayor Gallego, I agree with you, I think we need to stress the bipartisanship part of this. Small cities, big cities, cities in Phoenix, cities outside of Phoenix, everything that we can come together around to emphasize why this is such a disaster. Let's go around the rest of the room. If it's okay, I want to start with people who are actually at MAG headquarters and then go to people online. So I see Mayor Orsborn diligently taking notes. And if the staff can help me kind of identify people in the room who want to speak up after Mayor Washburn, that would be great.
Thank you, Chair. Well, this is a great first executive session meeting for me at MAG. Thanks a lot. Really appreciate this. I am just dumbfounded by what's happened. I thought it was difficult to get through the legislature. It finally got through. I thought there was a ton of support that came out for that, and was so shocked by the veto. And then reading the reasons in the letter, I'm even more dumbfounded. I simply do not get it. So that is a letter that's been put out in the public, and that's the answer from the governor for the reasoning on the veto. And I think we go scorched earth on it and answer that specifically back. I agree we don't want to use in here the words that you were probably saying yesterday. But I think we need to be very blunt with the public about here is the misinformation that is sent out in that letter. Here are the realities of what this veto means to the region, and talk about whose responsibility it is to maintain roads. Basically, the stuff that you had hit in your comments. I think it is important that we get out incredibly strong on that and make sure that we're informing the public of here are the realities in what happened the other day. The second is I think we come up with the long list of projects, and for me specifically, I know we talk about Jackrabbit Trail and the interchange there and the need for rebuilding that interchange. And this Prop 400 extension was going to allow the ability to move that project forward and make something happen. So if now we go back and tell the public we were this close to doing that, and I know it's not just about that, that's what speaks to the people in my community. And we need to figure out what those projects are that speak, and all of them do to one extent or another, what speaks to the people in the metro or the central Phoenix area, and then talk about Mesa and Queen Creek, and really hit on the projects that are going to be significantly affected, delayed, or just canceled because the governor vetoed a great piece of legislation coming through. And then I think one of the other, and I think that speaks to folks on both sides of the aisle, and I know this gets to be a real political hot potato, because you have some people that are not interested in certain forms of transit. You have others that are wanting to concentrate specifically on those transit. We get it in Buckeye. We should stop building freeways. I had somebody call me the other day. Stop building freeways. Don't worry about the expansion of I-10, and just build high-speed rail into Phoenix. And that's one nutty call. But everybody is touched by the veto and the projects and what we have going on. So I think it's incredibly important that we come out strong with an answer letter. And then it's really a PR campaign or a information campaign that we get out to the public that informs them of the projects that are now at risk if we can't get something through by 2024 and continue. I think that's a big miss, unless I'm misunderstanding the tax. The current tax is not done until 2025. So this wasn't an increase over this time that we're in with this recession. This is the future is so gloomy that we're not even going to continue the investment that we're making in infrastructure over the next 20 years. This makes no difference in what we're being taxed over the next 2 to 3 years, none whatsoever. So I think we need to make sure that the public understands that, and really it's about getting the information out to the public to where they fully understand the impacts of the veto that happened. Completely on board with looking at some sort of legal action. I think that's what we had talked about when we passed this. No one was thrilled with just a 0.5% extension. It was we worked to get that through, and then we work with the legislature over the next year or two to figure out once the extension is complete, we work with that legislative body to figure out what the future is and how we can remove that requirement for just Maricopa County to do the basically running this through the legislature and agree 100%. Somebody in Mojave County, why should they have a say in what we're doing in the Metro Phoenix area? So, I mean, I'm probably starting to ramble a little bit, but it is just so frustrating to get to the 1 foot line and then not get the ball over the goal line. So, I mean, I think I'm echoing a lot of what's been said here, but I really think that we need to make sure that there's a concerted effort to help the public understand here's exactly what that means and an answer back to that letter. And then we start putting out some information from MAG that is not an entire letter that goes through this, but here are the projects specifically that are really at risk right now. And then describe here's why we were going through it in 2022 instead of waiting until 2024. Because if this happens in 2024, it's no kidding shut off. We have no funding at that point to continue on projects that are going. So the other thing I would like to get is from staff, MAG staff, is a succinct bullet point set for, I think, everybody at MAG. So we're all kind of reading from the same sheet of music, and we're getting straight facts out about details related to what was in the plan, what wasn't in the plan, and what the veto means. Chair, I'll stop rambling now. Thank you for this being my first executive session and getting to talk about stuff like this. Thank you, Chair.
No, Eric, I appreciate that. And I think it's hard not to be frustrated with what just happened over the last few days. And it's not rambling, it's frustration that comes out, and it's just, how do I get what I want to say into words and show how upset I am? So don't ever worry about that. And I'm glad that we could ruin your weekend for the first MAG executive session under my rule. So that's good. Is there anybody else in the room who's there? Mayors? I think I saw Mayor Peterson.
Yes, Chairman, Mr. Chairman, this is Les Peterson from Carefree. Let me echo the same. It goes beyond frustration. It's in the anger category. It reminds me to some extent of the short-term rental situation where I did not think the governor had sufficient information or had the wrong information to make the decisions that he did. So one of the things, and I had a list of questions that I was going to listen and try and arrive at. Who made this decision? You know, who influenced this decision, and what was their objectives in this? Because I don't think he came to, the reasons that I saw in the letter were superfluous, frankly. They weren't of the magnitude after it had gone through the legislative process, after it had received the approvals here to warrant a veto. So I think he's suffering from a lack of knowledge of what the real situation is. So I would echo support for we, and not only we, but the group who is impacted by this. I have to believe that GPEC is impacted by this. I mean, there's a whole host of county supervisors. We ought to organize and see the governor. And my next question is this reversible? Can he change his mind this week? And can we still make timing to do this? Because I think he's suffering from the wrong information or a lack of information. And I think we ought to tell him that. in no uncertain terms. The other question is, who can do something about it? Can the legislature? I mean, accompanying us, there are reasons they passed it. The reasons from the legislator from Scottsdale, I'm not sure that individual understood what we were up to. What are the range of response options? Who's the target? So I think I'm echoing and deeply supporting. I think we ought to do something. I think we should react swiftly and as strongly as we can to this and tell him he's wrong. And tell him what it is that we had recommended to him and the reasons for it, and ask him to reconsider if that is still possible and get it on. I wouldn't give up unless we're past the legislative due date on that. And that's a question for Mr. Kaufman.
And Nathan, do you mind chiming in on that too? And Mr. Kaufman, if it doesn't really matter to me who chimes in, but Les has raised two really good questions, and I want to kind of get some comments on there and see kind of what if there is any action that we can take immediately.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the executive committee, and we do have policy AZ on hand to help respond to those type of questions too. You know, we've seen in recent responses by members of MAG considerations about overriding a veto. Our understanding is that, of course, it would take supermajority of both houses to do that, and also would have to call back into session. I'll look upon Dana Paschke to help talk about the potential response to this range of options. Dana's on the line and in the meeting, and also regarding what's the opportunity for the governor to reconsider. So Dana, are you available?
Hi, Nathan. Good morning, everyone. I'm not going to join via video since my connection is a little weak and I'm afraid it's going to freeze up on me. But Nathan did indicate that there are processes by which the legislature can overturn a veto. I'm not aware of any mechanism by which he can retract a veto. If the legislature is in session, the legislature can do a 2/3 vote of both chambers to override a veto. We're obviously no longer in session, so that would require a 2/3 vote of the legislature to reconvene, and then a 2/3 vote of the legislature to do a veto override. I did check on that. That has never, there's no record that anyone has been able to find of that mechanism actually being utilized, which is reconvening into session. The last time a veto override occurred was 41 years ago in 1981 during a special session, but the legislature was still in session at the time, so just needed to do the 2/3 vote to override Governor Babbitt at the time. So while there are mechanisms available, they're not used often and would be challenging to pursue at this point.
Dana, what power does we have an election in November, what power would an incoming governor have if they were so inclined to take up our argument?
Well, Governor Ducey is in office until the new governor is sworn in January. So, you know, obviously the impact of both the primary and general elections will definitely help us guide our steps as we move forward. Once we get through the primary, we'll sort of see what the composition of the legislature looks like. And as you know, some of the mayors have alluded to, we need to start now building our base and broadening our outreach to, you know, business community interests, incoming electeds, the future governor, and hopeful that we could get a different outcome. Not to say that a special session couldn't be called by the end of the year if Governor Ducey so chose to change his position on this, but I think we need to look at other alternatives and focus our efforts that way.
I guess I would ask though, so let's say let's say there will be a new governor January 1st. The legislature comes into session shortly thereafter. If they were to make a Prop 400E bill a priority, is that a mechanism that we should pursue? Or we bide our time for 2024?
We, back in 2004, when that legislation for Prop 400 was passed, we did just what you were suggesting. There was a broad effort. That bill was moved through the legislature in a matter of 6 or 7 weeks, and on the governor's desk and signed. So it is feasible to do that. I think we will need to see what the legislative composition, looks like post November. But that, yes, that is one option that we can be pursuing.
Are there any other mayors in the room at the MEG headquarters?
Mr. Chairman, this is Les Peterson again. If I may make an additional comment. If this veto stands and we go back and try and put it on the ballot for next spring, we have a different communication challenge because we were wrong this time, is how it will come out. He vetoed it because it was insufficient in our support for it. So while I would predict it'll pass if it had gone forward now, I'm less certain in the spring. However, now if we wait until 24, our chances probably come up. But you're right on the cusp then. If it doesn't pass, turn the lights out.
If I could add one thing on the election timing issue, when we did Prop 400, we were shooting for a May 2004 election at that point. And so that was the initial ask in January of 2004. We were asked to move it to the November general election cycle because of the higher turnout. And quite frankly, I think some thought that with the higher turnout, there was a good chance it would be defeated. Don't know the logic about that, but and one of the comments in the veto letter has to do with the special election in the spring of 2023 and the cost of that. And it would be better to have it in a general election in November of 2024 because of the higher turnout. One of the facts that I think you have to keep in mind is if the legislature would have acted sooner this session on the bill, we would have had a November 2022 election. But because of the desire to use this as political leverage in terms of the budget, water, and education, it was put as one of the last bills out of the legislature. So we were forced out of the November 2022 cycle into a 2023 time period. And so that's the background on that. So now we're being criticized for something that policy decision that basically the governor's office and the legislature made to have this bill move last. And as Dana said, House Bill 2456 in 2004, we actually had Governor Napolitano in our SWAR room signing the bill in early November. And so that's how different the political atmosphere is, quite frankly, that we're dealing with today. Thank you.
Les, does that answer your question?
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Mayor Hartke?
Thank you. And sorry I couldn't be there live. I had a speaking engagement at 9 that took me right to 10. So I'm glad to be part of this conversation. A lot of the things I would say have already been said, so I'll just be brief on my comments. First of all, I really don't currently understand the short-term options that have been mentioned, and I really need some help. Dana, thank you for, I think, clearing some of those, but I am all things a pragmatist on this, and I want to do whatever we can do to get this thing across the road, and I'm 100% on board. I did get a call from the governor's chief of staff before the announcement. I expressed my strong concern and disappointment then, and I will continue to do the same. I agree, we need to have a strong response, whether that is in letter or a live thing, but I think a united front, get every mayor, every local official, and say the governor was wrong, and this is why. I, like every other mayor in this room, get tired of state and officials saying that we believe those closest to the people should make the decisions, and they tout that until they don't. And this is another case to me of saying it, but not following up your words with actions. We've put a lot of work into this, and I personally have gotten on every transportation committee, RPTA, Valley Metro, this possible, because I understand the importance of this. So we need to have a strong response. I'm just not currently understanding, particularly after Dana's conversation, what options we have before teeing up for this next legislature. If there's viable ones, I'm all for it. I don't really want to go chasing down rabbit holes to poke people if there's no possible fruit involved with that. But I do believe that we, in our efforts, need to make this one of the most important conversations regarding the election coming up, both primary, short term, and up to November. This needs to be very front and center, and all the reasons been expressed at this meeting so far need to come out, and how crucial this is, and how we need to make this possible. So with that, I'm all for exploring all viable options, whether they're short, if they are viable, and certainly be as strong as we can and united as we can to get this across the board beyond the veto. I wish there was a way. I don't think, since this is such a narrow margin of that brought this to the governor's plate. So I don't know how viable a 2/3 majority to call a special session to vote on a special session. It's not just convincing the governor, it's convincing a lot of other folks that I've not been able to convince. My own local representative Republicans, for example, I haven't been able to get them across the table for their own reasons. So I just don't know if that's viable, but I am all in on all efforts. Thank you.
No, Kevin, I think you bring up a good point, and that is, where do we put our efforts that are going to produce fruit? And I don't know, Eric and Nathan and Dana, I think it would help this committee to have some options put out there for what we can do, not from a response, but lobbying efforts and everything else. And what are the chances of that paying off? It doesn't sound like we'd have the opportunity to get the session back in. We have legislators who are running for office. They're not going to go back into session. They're just not. And to get 2/3 of them, or 3/4, whatever the number is, I agree with Kevin. I don't want to go down rabbit holes just to show that we're doing something. I want to do something that produces results. So if we can include that in the next few days, kind of what our options are and what is the viability of those options, I think it would help this committee. Mayor Amorsio?
Thank you, Chair. I feel very similarly to many, if not all, folks, in that the decision was incredibly frustrating and disappointing. I feel like the veto was very short-sighted, especially when it comes to the advancement and the growth of not only our region, but our states. It felt almost a little bit disrespectful, considering the amount of time and effort, collaboration, bipartisan support that went into putting this forward. And so I'm very interested in showcasing the impact that this veto would have, that it would have on the projects that are impacted, not only with numbers and data, but also on a personal level and how it will impact our residents. Because I feel like obviously this is going to impact our communities, and we also need to showcase those stories. I go back to what Mayor Osborne shared about this needing to be an information campaign and a PR campaign. I'm also in support of what Mayor Gallego shared about taking legal action. And so, like you said, I want for our actions and our response to be one that will bear fruit and have a strong outcome. And so whatever needs to be done in order to get to that place, count on my support with that.
Thank you, Mayor. So we get to the point here where we need to give staff direction on kind of what we're looking to do. So if I hear this correctly, we want to have a vibrant and strong response to the governor's veto, first and foremost. And I think we should let MAG staff kind of draft that response, whether it is a press conference, whether it's an email, whether it's a letter to the public, whatever that looks like, and give the committee a chance to look at that and respond, obviously sooner than later. Secondly, we want to look at options that we have politically to see if there is the ability for us to get Prop 400E back to the voters. Doesn't sound like there is, but let's give Nathan and Dana the chance to respond to that. And then it sounds like the third thing we want to direct MAG staff on is what is our long-term plan on this? Let's say that we can't get anything back in front of the governor. He's not going to budge on this. We can't get the legislature back. What is our long-term response? The next 6 months to a year? Are we pursuing, we're obviously pursuing getting Prop 400 back on before voters in 2024. Is there an option for 2023? And then do we give MAG staff the go-ahead to pursue working on a proposition to allow Maricopa County to go directly to the voters? Or do we look at that going to the legislature? Do I have that correct? Am I missing anything?
Mayor?
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Just wanted to make sure we would include reevaluate the current program.
Thank you. Yes.
And I really appreciated Mayor Peterson's comment that this is broader than just the mayor. So he'd mentioned GPEC and other stakeholders. I think the more stakeholders who are involved in the response, the more likely we are to be effective. And also would really like us to hammer that this was giving voters the chance to make a decision. We were not forcing anything on the voters.
Eric, do you have what you need? Do you need a motion from this body, or is direction just enough?
Mr. Chairman, members of the Executive Committee, I think we have enough guidance. So we want to do a point-by-point response to the veto letter, strongly worded. I think that's came out loud and clear. Explore options, and I think the idea of trying to resurrect House Bill 2685 is probably off the table because I don't think we're going to get the legislature, as been observed. We couldn't quite get the 2/3 for an emergency clause. It's hard to imagine that we get 2/3 to call a special session for this purpose, and it's an election year. So once again, I think that's off the table. I think looking at legislative options, as Dana mentioned, we won't know what the composition legislature is going to look like until after the November election cycle, as well as who the new governor is. So there's uncertainty with that. The initiative process we will look at. We've had some internal discussion on that. And one of the simple questions is, can we do a county-specific initiative? So once again, we'll be looking at those sorts of issues. We've already started some of the research internally. On the project impact side, we certainly need to evaluate kind of where we are on Prop 400 and making sure that we have the right projects funded. And if we need to make some changes in some of those projects, we ought to do that quickly. We'll look at the inflation impact of the delay. You might say, well, you know, the money doesn't start flowing until 2026 anyway from the extension. Why would there be a delay if we have to wait till 2024? I've said before, we have a lot of project development activities going right now that, quite frankly, it's may not be prudent to continue those with uncertain funding for construction. We don't want to have a bunch of projects that are ready to go to construction, but we don't have any funding for, and then have to be redesigned, or basically that investment is lost. So we'll be looking at that too. And finally, we'll look at if the extension, if we don't have the extension, what happens? Certainly we have a catastrophic impact on our transit service. There's a significant amount of current transit services funded out of Prop 400 operations. And so without that continuing source of funding, those routes will have to be stopped, basically. And obviously there's other projects, and Mayor Osborne and Mayor Weiss might want to close their ears, but State Route 30 obviously is contingent on the extension, and continuing improvements on I-10 as well as State Route 30 out in Buckeye are contingent on the extension too. So, Mr. Chair, I think that that's my summary. If there's anything I missed, let me know.
Mr. Chair, this is Mayor Giles, could I make a comment as well?
Yes, sir.
I would suggest that perhaps a vehicle that we might entertain using as both a TPC and as a regional council would be a resolution. Just officially, everyone steps in, we vote, we say, boy, that was a horribly bad decision. We reject that, and we encourage everyone to rally around correcting this mistake. That's one vehicle that we could use. And in the summaries, I guess, again, maybe it's the lawyer in me, but I want to go into a courtroom tomorrow. You know, and not if it's a bad idea, but I think I'd like to authorize staff to have some conversations with some very good litigators and have them tell us if this is a good fight or not. If we don't get encouraging legal opinions, then I'll back down. But I think that is a way to solve this problem.
You're talking about the fact that Maricopa County has to go to the legislature.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes, I'd like to mount a legal challenge to the restriction on us as opposed to all of the other counties. And if we can get that overturned, I think, and obviously litigation is painfully slow, but everything we're talking about here is painfully slow. So that might finish first.
Mayor Harkey, you had your hand up set from before. Do you have a question on this?
I sure do. Thank you for noticing my hand again. I don't understand enough of what a legal challenge would do in terms of timeliness, but I'm all for that. But my comment is more, we're now also in the space where we're planning for the League of Cities conference. And since this seems to be a statewide issue, to give us that ability to be able to direct our county's futures, and since this is a local rule or a local control issue, I think we need to also bring this to the League of Cities. They will have a number of legislators there and take this across the state, and not only get us at that point, but every other mayor and city on board with saying Maricopa County should be able to have the same rights that we do in our counties to control their destiny. And I just think that's a timely opportunity for us to interject and again, further the conversation concerning elections and everyone else to get the people on board that are going to give us both the freedom to have the votes that we need for our county, as well as get some statewide local control on our sales, so that when we're talking with legislators, it's not just us in the county talking to Yuma or Sierra Vista or Flagstaff, but get some statewide alliances and saying, why are you guys holding them to a standard you're not holding us to? Thank you.
And John, I think that's what you're talking about, correct? Mayor Giles?
I'm open to whatever legal challenge a good lawyer thinks we could mount. But first blush, I think this distinction that's drawn between us and every other county is, I find legally offensive. And if we get that set aside, then I think until the legislature reconvenes and causes more mischief, that might clear the runway for us.
All right, Eric, I don't hear any objection. Oh, Les, go ahead. I'm sorry, I see your hand.
Sure. Mr. Chair, Sam Kaufman, General Counsel. Let me just make a couple comments here, so maybe we can clarify a few things. I think there's an issue, first of all, and to be very clear, I know we've a couple of times used the word executive session, and of course, we're not an executive session. You're just the executive committee in a public session. And for executive session, it certainly would be appropriate to come back and to provide, and that's what executive session is for, of course, to provide you legal advice regarding, potential lawsuits, risk, time, expense, all of those things. And that sounds like a perfect agenda item to move forward with haste. And I think the instruction's been made there. The second issue is there's been a lot put on the plate about what from the chair about doing certain things. And then Mr. Anderson came back with basic full agenda. And let's see if we can break that down for a minute. I don't believe you have to make a motion for MAG to do what MAG does, right? Which is this is their function, to look at alternatives, to move forward and to make analysis. But I think there were some specific things, which is, in fact, what you were agendized to be here for was the response to the House bill. So I know it seems like a motion could be appropriate to prepare a response, setting forth what has been communicated today from the committee, the responses, setting forth the detail of why the decision is wrong and the results thereof. So I think that would be an appropriate motion. And if there were specific other items that the committee wants to make a motion to do, that would be appropriate too. I just want to make sure we have a clear record coming out of this meeting.
Sam, I appreciate that. Let's start with the first thing first. So executive session, if we're going to ask for legal advice going forward, when is the soonest that we could have that executive session? Sam?
I believe the analysis would probably take 10 days at least to give you initial analysis, would be reasonable.
Okay. Eric, so let's let Sam and your team work together to see what our legal options are regarding a lawsuit regarding the county taxation. And then once we get to that point, if we feel we need to have an executive session, let's go ahead and schedule that. As regards to Sam, to your second point, drafting a response to the governor's veto, let's get a motion on that, and that will allow us to be within legal certitude. So, John, do you want to make that, or Kate, do you want to make that motion and put it into verbiage?
If I might make a comment before we ask John to make a motion, please. And that is just, we should recall when we go out, this is the first step. This is our introduction on the communication to voters to pass this. So we ought to be very thorough in the reasons why this is good. I thought, Mayor Gallego, your point, one person substituting for the vote of all of the people here. This is our first communication leading to a vote that's going to come up at some point in time. So we need to think through what those things are going to be and make that a part of it for when we get there. What are the problems with this? And as far as I'm concerned, and I say this to some extent politically, we ought to put in there, this means no construction of Route 30. For example, this is going to halt construction. Let's put the things in that these would have been in there.
Can I just follow up on that, Chair? I hate even hearing that out loud. I'm going to be sick to my stomach all day. I think not only here are the negatives of this not passing, but here are the benefits of Prop 400 over the last 20 years and really key in on the economic development aspect of that. So in our neighborhood, Loop 303 was built with those funds, and the massive amount of economic expansion that's happening out there. Light rail, all along the light rail line, I can't remember what Scott Smith would tout, or Valley Metro touts, is you have the return on investment from, I think it's a 6-to-1 or 9-to-1 return on investment. So making sure that we're hitting really hard those points, and then also making sure that people understand the polling that's been done and how in favor of not only the half cent, but a larger amount of revenue was looked at positively by the folks that were polled. I think it's important to not only make sure the public understands here are the negatives of, I'm not even going to say that again out loud, but here are the absolute positives. And this is an investment in infrastructure and economic development opportunities moving forward.
Mr. Chair, members of the Executive Committee, Mayor Osborne, I think those are really good points. The good news is the public gets it already, and we can reinforce that. But our public opinion surveying that we did 2-3 years ago, our value mapping, we were up over 70% supports a continuation of the tax. Tremendous amount of support for what we've done on transportation historically. People like what we've done. They appreciate what we've done, especially when they compare it to where they came from. So once again, I think we're on a very good place with the public, which is really positive. The public does get it, even though perhaps the governor didn't. Thank you.
Well, if you don't mind, I will make a motion that we do put on our next agenda, and perhaps we call an emergency meeting of a special meeting of MAG and or the TPC to adopt a resolution. And those of us who write proclamations and resolutions, there's a lot of great wherefore clauses that we just talked about here. I mean, I think it is correct. We start messaging this now. This is not a battle, but this is not politicians fighting politicians. This is one individual abusing his political power and preventing the people from enacting their power. And we know where the public is at on this. So that's a gross abuse of political power, and that needs to be called out. Also, we need to rehearse the economic impact. If this were a math problem, it would be easy, right? I mean, the one side of the ledger is huge, and that's our side of the ledger. So I make a motion that staff prepare a resolution for adoption by our regional council and or TPC, and that it include the talking points that we've discussed.
I have a motion. Can I get a second?
Amendment.
Please.
Could we also authorize perhaps either Eric or our chair to sign a coalition letter with folks like GPEC, as Mayor Peterson said, saying that this transportation tax is very important. So it would be both a resolution from us, but then a MAG representative signing a broader coalition letter with a variety of stakeholders, recognizing what you just said, it is not just mayors who are deeply concerned.
Thank you. I think that's an important addition. We do need to look for more partners, GPEC and industry organizations to partner with. So thank you.
Second.
Sam, does that motion and second suffice for you?
I believe it is. Just to be clear, I understand that the first part of it is going to be the preparation of the response, and it's subject to the approval. The fact that it's subject to the approval gives more broad, I think the request can be made broadly consistent with the record of this public hearing, which anyone can go back and play if they wish. So I believe that meets the requirement. The second one is the coalition. Is your motion that the coalition communication be approved or that it just be pursued at this point? Just to clarify, I think you're saying both are approved.
Authorize a MAG representative to make the decision about, so Mayor Weiss, do you want to do it or do we want Eric to do it?
No, I don't mind signing that letter. I think it's more
So
powerful.
I would like to authorize Mayor Weiss to sign and use his judgment when it is ready to be signed. So he would be the approver.
I agree. That's a good motion.
Sam, you good with that?
I'm good with that, Eric. Is that?
Yep.
I think.
All right. So we have a motion from Mayor Giles, a second from Mayor Gallego. Can we do the voodoo that we do as we get approvals?
I'll go through all the members alphabetically, and please indicate how you vote. All those in favor say aye, and those opposed say nay.
Aye.
Aye.
Let me go through the entire roll call if that's all right.
You may just go to the people remote, and I think the record shows that everyone here physically voted. So you just the two people that are remote would be acceptable.
Thank you, Mr.
Three, I'm
Kaufman.
sorry, apologize.
Mr. Chair, Mayor Hartke, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mayor Hermosillo, how do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you. And Chair Weiss, how do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you. We have unanimous passing of the motion.
Thank you, committee members. I really appreciate that. Moving on, item 5 is a request for future agenda items. Are there any future agenda item requests for the membership? Seeing none.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, I believe we sort of in the middle of the meeting, you did request a future agenda item,
Okay.
which is a possible
Right.
session for legal advice. So I think the record can reflect that as a request and you don't
Yeah.
have.
Okay, Sam, thank you. I just didn't know if there was anybody else in the committee who had that request also, so I appreciate that clarification. As we wrap up, are there any last comments that committee members want to make for the record before we adjourn? Seeing none, we are adjourned. Thank you, members.
Thank you all.